A spider web and I'm caught in the middle, so I turn to run. Think of all the stupid things I've done. And I'm caught in the middle, so I turn my head and think of all the stupid things I've said. I never meant to cause you trouble. I never meant to do you wrong. To do you harm. Oh no, what's this? A spider web, and that's me in the middle. I twist and turn here in my little bubble, singing I never meant to cause you trouble. I never meant to do you wrong. Oh, if I ever cause you trouble, to do you harm. They spun a web for me. They spun a web for me. They spun a web for me.
You know, I think we can all relate to that song we just heard, where Mickey sang the words, "And I lost my head. And I thought about the stupid things I said. And I never meant to cause you trouble. And I never meant to do you wrong." I think every single one of us, as we think about our lives, can relate to that. That moment in our life where we thought to ourselves, like, what in the world did I say? How could I have said that? I mean, I didn't mean to cause you harm. I didn't mean to create that hurt in your life with what I said. And it really just points us back to the fact that words are powerful. Words are extraordinarily powerful in your life and my life. I mean, words have shaped us. Things said about us, things said to us, have shaped every single one of our lives. Words have shaped our marriage. Words have shaped our friendships. Words have shaped some of our most intimate relationships. If you're here today or you're watching online and you're a parent, I mean, you know that the words that you've said to your sons and daughters have shaped their value and shaped their identity and shaped their self-worth. Words are powerful. And words have shaped what we see when we look in the mirror. Again, it all points back to the fact that words are powerful. And as we think about words, something that's true is this, is that words aren't equally weighted. As you think about just words in your life and my life, they're just not equally weighted. In other words, think about it this way, is that if somebody says one negative thing, the question becomes, how many positive things do you need to say to kind of counterweigh that negative thing? There's a lot of research on this, but research will indicate anywhere between 5 to 10 positive words for every negative word that someone says to you. That's what we need to kind of balance it out, but it just shows they're not equal. And then if you think a little bit more about this, I mean, the reality in your life and in my life, that there have been people who have said things to us, perhaps a dad, perhaps a mom, perhaps that ex-wife or ex-husband, that they have shaped our lives. Not for a month, not for a year, but because of those words, it's driven us our entire life. See, words aren't equally weighted. And something else that's true about words is the source isn't equally weighted as well. That, my role here at North Point, I have the privilege to be the lead pastor, but I also have a responsibility to be a boss. And we have a staff here, and I have direct reports that report to me. And as a boss, what I understand is that my words weigh about 100 pounds. In other words, when I'm in a meeting and we're trying to come up with some collaborative idea or something innovative and creative, if I speak too early, I can squash ideas in the room. I can take the innovation and creativity that exists in the room and not gain that because I've spoken too early and I didn't take in mind that my words as a boss weigh about 100 pounds. And if you're a leader, if you're a manager, if you're a boss, if you're a team leader, you know exactly what I'm talking about. And that's not only true when it comes to, management or responsibilities, but that's also true when it comes to our family. I mean, moms, when you speak to your kids, your words weigh about 500 pounds. Your words are so weighty and so important. But fathers, when you speak to your children, your words weigh about 1,000 pounds, don't they? And I can't quite explain why that exists or why it is that way, but it is that way. I remember a couple years ago, I was talking to this young man, and I actually was mentoring him. And he and I were in my office, and he was sharing a decision he made in his life, and it was a really big decision, and it was a decision that required an enormous amount of character, an enormous amount of strength to make this kind of decision. And I was so incredibly proud of him, and he and I were sitting there, and I looked at him, and he's sitting across from my desk, and I said, man, I am so proud of you. That took courage and strength, and you are such a man. You're such a man. And in that moment, emotion began to flood over him. And he put his head on the desk, and for the next couple minutes, he just cried uncontrollably. And after he got done, crying, he kind of lifted his head, and I looked at him, and I said, what was happening here? What was that all about? What were you feeling? And he looked at me, and he said, Buck, I so wish my father would say those words to me. And here I am as his mentor, his pastor. And I realized that my words don't weigh nearly the weight of his father. In other words, the source isn't equally weighted. And that's not only true when it comes to words, but this is also true. The recovery time isn't equally weighted as well. If I say something that hurts you, the recovery time takes time. I can say something that's hurtful and it hurts immediately, but the recovery of what I've said to what I've said, that's going to take time. And we don't like that. When we say something hurtful to somebody, we want things to be fine. We want to go, oops, I said something bad. I've apologized. It's fine. And so we say things like this. We say, I said I'm sorry. I know what I said was hurtful, but I said I'm sorry. In fact, I said it like 3 times. Can't we just be fine? Can't we just get back to normal? Can't we get back to status quo? But you can't, can you? Because what you say is hurtful, and that's immediate. But recovery takes time. Forgiveness takes time. And all of that points to the fact that words, your words, my words, are powerful. And if there was ever an area in your life and my life that we should establish personal guardrails, it's the area of words. And the reason we're talking about guardrails is because today we're in part 3 of the series that we've been in over the last couple of weeks called Guardrails. And throughout the series, what we've said is that we all understand what guardrails are. I mean, you've seen them. I've seen them on roadways and highways and bridges and curbs. We've all seen them. And we know the purpose of a guardrail is to direct and protect. Ultimately, the purpose of a guardrail is to minimize the damage we could experience on highways and roadways. But what we said throughout this series is we don't only need guardrails on highways and roadways, but we need guardrails in our lives. Because as you think about your life and reflect about your life, and as I think about my life, some of our greatest regrets in life could have been prevented if we had simply established some financial guardrails, some moral guardrails, some dating guardrails, some friendship guardrails, some ethical guardrails. And if there was ever a place in our life, to continue this discussion about having personal guardrails, it's with our words. So today, it's what we're going to talk about. Now, the good news is this, is that 2,000 years ago, there was actually an individual who spoke into this conversation. And the individual's name is James. And James, if you're familiar with the story, it's just an incredible story. I wish we had a lot of time to talk about him. But the things that I would want to highlight for you about the life of James is he was the brother of Jesus. I mean, think about that, growing up with Jesus, experiencing kind of all those sibling kind of things. I mean, he's a brother of Jesus. And what's unique about the life of James is he was not a follower of Jesus during the ministry of Jesus. Jesus' ministry only lasted 3 years. James doesn't show up anywhere in the historical record when it comes to his ministry. But then all of a sudden, James comes kind of flying onto the historical scene when something happened. James became a follower of Jesus Christ. In fact, James went so far to call Jesus his Lord. He called his brother his God. Something happened in human history. And what James would say happened is not that his brother was a great teacher, not that his brother had a superior philosophy or religious system, but that his brother came back from the dead. And when Jesus was crucified and 3 days later he rose from the dead, James said, what you claimed is true. You are the unique Son of God. And he gave his life as a follower of Jesus Christ. And one of the things James did is he wrote a letter to followers of Christ. And as he wrote this letter to these followers of Christ, he wrote about the discussion we're having today. He wrote about words, and that words are powerful. And he reminds us of some incredible insight. So we're going to look at that today and what James actually has to say. In fact, James starts the whole discussion about words this way. Very interesting. He says, we all stumble in many ways. And remember, he's talking about words, and this is important, to understand that. As he talks about words, he's saying, hey, we've all messed up. Like, you've said some wrong things. I've said wrong things. We've all stumbled, which even if you don't believe the Bible, and even if you're like, I'm not sure the Bible's true, at least you believe this part's true. Because you've gone, yeah, that is true. Every single one of us have messed up when it comes to our words. But then he kind of contradicts himself, it seems, in this next statement. He says, those who are never at fault in what they say are perfect, able to keep their whole body in check. And the question is, James, what are you saying here? I mean, you say we mess up and then you can be perfect. What are you saying here? And what's really important to understand is this word perfect. Because when you read in the scriptures and you open the Bible and you see the word perfect, oftentimes our mind goes to the Webster definition that you never mess up. You are perfect. You've never messed up. You've never been tempted to mess. You just never mess up. That's what we think. But the word perfect, anytime you see that when you're reading the scriptures and it applies to a human being and you see the word perfect, it means mature. It doesn't mean by definition what we think today, perfect. It means that there's something in your life that no longer controls you. That thing in people's lives that has a tendency to control them, you've gotten to the ability to become mature, have life experience, make consistent decisions, and get to a place of maturity. That's what the word perfect means. And James is saying, guys, when we get to a place where we begin to control our mouth, it has a profound impact on the direction of our entire life. Meaning this, think about it this way. Choosing to be wise with your mouth leads to being wise with your whole life. That the tools, internal tools that are required to make decisions around the words you're going to say and how you're going to say those and how you're going to phrase it and how it's going to be profitable for the people around you. As you think about that and what's required to have wisdom with your words, It's the very same tools that are required to make wise choices in life. You could summarize this whole thing saying, wise with words, wise with your life. And what's fascinating is James is saying this little part of you. I mean, think about it. It's your mouth. It's a tiny part of your entire body. Your mouth determines the direction of your whole life. And he actually illustrates that in a couple interesting ways. He continues the conversation. He says, hey, let me illustrate that little part makes such a big deal. He says, when we put bits into the mouths of horses to make them obey us, we can turn the whole animal. Now, if you're not familiar with what a bit is, it looks something like this. And this is something you put in horses' mouths. And a bit is about 5 inches long. And if you're curious to what 5 inches, that's about 5 inches. So imagine this. I mean, this is what we actually do. We put it in the horse's mouth. And this little bitty thing can control the animal. A typical horse, anywhere between 1,000 to 2,000 pounds. I mean, here's a Clydesdale. Look at this thing. That this little bit allows us to jump on their backs, allows us to lead them left and lead them right and make them jump and make them do all kinds of things with this tiny little part called a bit. And we think, well, James, that's interesting. That's a unique illustration of how a little part can determine so much about the whole animal. And then James continues and he says, hey, if you're not, big into animals, let me give you another illustration of my point. He says, or take ships as an example. Okay, we're thinking about ships. Although they are so large and driven by strong winds, they are steered by a very small rudder wherever the pilot wants to go. And we go, well, James, we kind of get this. I mean, we've all seen something like this, perhaps a big cargo ship. And you look at this rudder right here. I mean, this, in comparison to the ship, it's a very small part of that entire ship. And in the raging oceans, what controls the entire ship is that little bitty rudder. And we go, well, James, we kind of get that. What's your point with all this? He says, here's my point. He says, likewise, the tongue is a small part of the body, but it makes great boast. In other words, your mouth, your words, your tongue determines the direction of your entire life. It's all connected. And then he continues, and he gives us another kind of image or illustration. He goes, think about it this way. He goes, consider, which means think about this. What a great forest is set on fire by a small spark. And so as I thought about this verse, I thought, we can illustrate this. You guys know what this is? You guys aware of this? What's this called? A lighter? Any more? Maybe something more? Zippo. There we go. You and I, we know what Zippos are, right? Zippos, American made. And Zippos, they're fun and they're very addictive. And this week, I've been playing with the Zippo the whole time, and if you saw some social media, somebody showed a picture of me lighting a table on fire. If you get lighter fluid and just squirt it on the table and just light it on fire, it lights up real quick and then goes out real fast too. It's a lot of fun. And so I thought about doing that today. But it kind of got out of control a couple times, and I thought it would be memorable, but it may be the last thing we do here, right? So I'm not going to do that. But I want you to think about this. This is James' point. He's saying, listen. He says, this little flame has such great potential that this flame represents your words. And this flame can have a dramatic impact on your relationships and on your life. And this little flame can ultimately lead to starting a massive, massive forest fire. It has that kind of potential. And guys, I don't think we have to talk about this long because I think you've all seen friendships that have been burnt to the ground because of some words that were said. I think we've all seen marriages where people just back and forth and words, and I'm going to hurt you, and I'm going to hurt you. And we've watched marriages burn down because of words. That James is making the point, be careful. Your words are more powerful than you may think. And then he connects it. And he says, the tongue also is a fire, a world of evil among the parts of the body. I mean, think about this. A world of evil, the tongue. I mean, people have murdered one another because of words that have been said. You think about history. Wars have been started because the world of evil of words. We've all experienced this. And you also think about this word, where we have seen raging forest fires as a result of gossip. That somebody can't control their mouth. And they have to go to that next person, hey, let me tell you about her. Do you know what she did? Let me tell you about him. Do you know what he did? And they begin texting people and saying, hey, let me tell you why I made this decision. Let me tell you what's going on over here. Let me give you some insight. Let me tell you my perspective. Betrayal, 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 broken trust, broken trust. It's a small flame that has set infernos in families, in friendships, in organizations, and unfortunately, it's set infernos in churches. And that's why James says, guys, it's a world of evil. And then he begins to connect the words to our life, and he says, it corrupts the whole person. In other words, when somebody says something, we don't punish the mouth, right? It's not like, oh, we put your mouth in timeout. No, we put the whole person in timeout, especially if you're a parent, you get this. You put the whole person in timeout because of what they've said. You know, I think about my personal life, and I think about the one time, the only time I called my mom a name you should never, ever, ever, ever call your mom. And I was about 9 or 10 years old, and I said the word that you should never say when it comes to a woman. And I looked at her, and I was 9 or 10, and my mom made me so angry. And I looked at her, and I said, Mom, you're a beep. And as a 9 or 10 years old, I was so impressed because my mom had go-go gadget arms. And she reached across the room as it was like beep, like mid-syllable, and went like boom, boom, boom. I mean, she punished my mouth, so that this illustration doesn't really work. But it kind of, you know. But at that moment when I said that, I was like, wow. I had no idea my mom had that ability. But my whole body was grounded because of what I said. Your words simply are just not isolated to your mouth. Your words, James's point, impact your whole life. And then he goes even a step further and he says, you know, the whole person sets the whole course, the whole direction of one's life on fire. And come on, you can think of recent news or you can think of old news to where CEOs, you know, business owners, team leaders, people who started these incredible organizations because they said one word. Or maybe they said a cluster of words has led to a result of being fired from the very companies they've started. It's set the direction, it determined the direction of their whole life because of a word. And as I think about that, I think about my role here at North Point. I mean, today with a microphone strapped to my face, I can say some words. I could say one word. I could say several words that could cost me my job. I could say things that next week when you come back, because you probably would come back to see what in the heck's going to happen, that, you know, the elders would get up on stage and they would say something like this. They would say, you remember Buck? You remember him? Well, as a result of what he said, he's no longer here. See, words are powerful. And James is saying, guys, be careful. Your words can determine the direction and the quality of your life. And then he says something a little bit different, but still insightful. He says, all kinds of animals, birds, reptiles, and sea creatures are being tamed and have been tamed by human beings. And you all have seen this in zoos or maybe on TV. You've seen these massive animals trained by human beings. It's a fascinating thing to think about. And then he contrasts to this and he says, but no one can tame the tongue. It's a world of evil, and you cannot tame it. He goes on to talk about the duplicity of our words. And he says, out of the same mouth, we praise God, thank God, and out of the same mouth, we tear down an individual. Duplicity. And then he wraps the whole thing up, and he says something very interesting to think about. When it comes to our tongue, he says, it is a restless evil, full of deadly poison. And then he says, the end. It's evil, full of deadly poison. Now, you and I, when we read that, we go, James, come on. Give me something else. So James, I mean, that's an observation you made, but what do we do with that? I mean, that's not emotionally satisfying, is it? It's like, what are our 3 points of application? Where's some hope, James? Give me some hope, because yes, I've seen that, but what do we do? See, James doesn't do that. James just ends the passage here and just moves on to another topic. And I think James is just making an observation in your life and my life and all of our lives and saying, hey guys, I'm just making the observation that this is a deadly poison, that this is evil. And it can determine the whole direction and quality of your life and the lives around you. And so it's dangerous. So what do you do with things that you're not going to change the danger? I mean, it's dangerous. You're not going to change it. You're not going to make it different than that. It just is. What do you do with those? You see, that's why guardrails are so incredibly important. Because think of it this way. If you're on a big mountain road and there's this massive, massive cliff, hundreds of feet down, and you're driving on the road, I mean, you're not going to change the fact that it's dangerous. You're not going to dig up the whole mountain and change the cliff. That's not going to happen. It's dangerous. You can't change that. But what you can do is establish guardrails on that roadway. And guardrails can protect you. Guardrails can minimize the damage. Even if you bump into that, it can minimize the damage to where you may have to repair your car, but you're not repairing your life. That's the nature of a guardrail. And James's point is words are dangerous. He calls them a deadly poison, and you're not going to change it. So what do we do in those instances? That's why guardrails are so incredibly important around words. So today, as we kind of wrap up our time, I want to give you 2 words that are specific guardrails when it comes to our words and how we talk. And before I give you those guardrails, I actually want to give you the outcome. In other words, what I'm saying is this, is that if you're willing to implement these guardrails, these personal guardrails in your life, there's an outcome that will happen as a result of. And the outcome's really important to understand, and then I'll tell you how to get there. So the outcome is this, and the Apostle Paul gives us insight what the outcome could be in your life and my life. He says this, he says, do not let any unwholesome talk come out of your mouths, but only what is helpful for building others up according to their needs, that it may benefit those who listen. Now this is incredible, because he starts the whole thing to say, let no unwholesome talk come out of your mouth. Now, the literal meaning of unwholesome means rotten. In other words, he's saying, don't let words come out of your mouth that are rotten. And if you're willing to establish these guardrails in your life, it prevents you from saying things that rot your marriage, that rot your friendships, that rot your dating relationships, that rot your relationship with your kids. It prevents you from letting unwholesome talk come out of your mouth. And then he goes on and he says, and it allows you to say things that are profitable. And profitable that are beneficial because you've taken the interest of the person in mind before you've spoken a single word. You've thought about their context. You thought about their situation. You thought about what's going on in their life. And then you were able to speak into that in such a way that's helpful and profitable. And then if you're willing to do that with wholesome things out of your mouth that are beneficial and profitable, then it benefits those that are listening. Because your kids are watching you. And they're watching how you talk to one another. And they're watching how you talk to other people. Your friends are watching you. People on social media, they're watching you. And there is something you and I can do in our lives with these guardrails that allows us to get to a place to let no unwholesome talk come out of our mouth, but only what's helpful, profitable, to build people up according to their needs, so it may benefit the people who are listening. So what are the guardrails? The guardrails are 2 words. It's to remember and to surrender. Remember and surrender. So remember, what does that mean? It's what we just illustrated a second ago. To remember that your words are powerful, that your words are like this single flame. And this single flame can lead to this massive inferno. Don't forget that. Be careful with every word that leaves your mouth, because it determines the direction of your life. And you can breathe life into people with your words, and you can suck the life out of people because of your words. The first thing, if you and I were talking and we were saying, what are the guardrails we can establish? Before you say a single thing to that situation, to that circumstance, to that individual, to him or her, to pause a second, just a second, and remind yourself, remember, words are powerful. And the other thing I would say is this, is to surrender. Surrender. The question is, what does that even mean, to surrender? Well, Paul gives us insight into what this idea is to surrender when it comes to our words. Paul says these words. He says, and we take captive every thought to make it obedient to Christ. That's the idea here. To pause long enough in your life as you walk into that situation, as you're about to deal with your sons and daughters, as you're about to deal with your parents, whatever it is, that you pause long enough to take your thought captives, because your thoughts turn into words, and to make it obedient to Christ. And that word obedient literally means to surrender it, put it under Christ. Now, when you think about Jesus Christ, what was his one command to all of us? He boiled all the laws in the Bible to one law. He said, love as I have loved you, as I have been patient, as I have been kind, as I've kept no records of wrongs, as I haven't been selfish, I haven't been prideful. Love as Christ loved us. In other words, to surrender is to be willing to ask and answer this question. What does love require of me to say? When I'm talking to him or I'm talking to her and I'm talking to them, what does love require of me to say? To pause long enough to do that. And if you're going to pause long enough to remember your words and how powerful they are, if you're going to pause long enough to surrender, to take your thoughts captive, and then ask the question, what does love require of me to say to him, to her? It's also going to require you to respond, not to react. To respond, not to react. You know what a reaction is? A reaction is when you come into the room and you see your kids doing something you don't want them to do, and immediately you explode. And you have a lot of things to say to him because he did it again, or a lot of things to say to her. I mean, she was late again, and you react immediately with the thoughts inside of you. Reaction is to walk into that circumstance with him or in a marriage or at the workplace or at school or on a team or with a boyfriend or girlfriend and immediately react and have all kinds of words to say. Reactions lead to some of life's greatest regrets. But respond takes time. Respond means to pause long enough to walk into that situation with your kids and to realize your emotions are boiling and to pause long enough, perhaps going in a room, perhaps taking a minute, maybe 5 minutes to capture your thoughts, to ask yourself the question, what does love require of me to say in this moment? And then respond. There's a big difference. Now, as I think about these two concepts in my personal life, oh my gosh. One of my greatest regrets in life is the fact that with my kids, I have reacted over and over and over. And I've shared with you before, if you've come to North Point before, I've talked about one of my greatest regrets, if not my greatest regret in life, is some of the things I did in the early years with my kids. And so much of that was connected because I just reacted, paid attention to my emotion. I feel this, so I'm going to say this, right? It's led to a lot of regret. But a couple times I've gotten this right. And I was thinking about this week, and I remember, a couple years ago, Jill and I took our 5 boys to a football game, to a high school football game. We love doing that. And I remember on this particular night, it's Friday night, we go to the football stadium, and we all get seated, and our boys go with all their friends, and they all disappear, because that's what happens. We get there, and our boys go, and they're gone. And they go hang out with their friends and talk and do all kinds of things, and our twins are playing football somewhere over there. And so that happens the entire game. Then at the end of the game, we text them, and we're like, hey, come meet us. It's time to leave, that kind of thing in the fourth quarter. And so there were like 2 minutes left in the fourth quarter on this particular night, and I remember Jill and I are texting our boys, and all of them start showing up. Here's Michael and Jonathan, all of them show up except for Sam. Sam is our oldest son. And at the time, I think Sam was about 12 years old. And I remember we're like, Sam, where are you? And I started texting him more, like, son, where are you? And then I started calling him. And I felt that feeling as a parent. It's kind of this weird feeling because on one hand, I was like concerned, what's wrong with him? On the other hand, I was angry. Like, what the heck is going on? Like, why do I want to respond? And these feelings are all like, boiling up in me. And then I told Jill and the boys, I said, let's just go down to the exit, maybe standing by the exit with, his buddies, and his phone's in his pocket, and he just can't hear us. And so we're walking down, and we're walking towards the exit, and all of a sudden, I see a group of police officers. In the midst of those police officers, there's my son. And I walk up, and I say, hey, this is my son, what's going on? And police officer kind of grabs me, and I'm like, whoa, And he says, we're having a conversation with him. You can stay here and you can kind of get filled in. And he's talking to Sam about something very childish, very minor that he did. And it really upset them. So I'm listening to this whole conversation. As I'm listening to this, my emotions are starting to swell inside of me. And then, I'm seeing some of my friends pass by and they're like, "What's up, Buck?" With kind of that, like, I wonder what's going on. And that begins to get a little bit embarrassing. Then I see, people from North Point are walking by and they're like, "That's our pastor. Look at him." I'm like, oh my gosh. And I'm telling you, I just started feeling all those feelings, my insecurities. This had nothing really to do with Sam. It had everything to do with my brokenness and my insecurities and my anger and my embarrassment. And oh my gosh, start boiling up. And I'm thinking, for all this is going on, and the police officers release Sam, and we walk about 400 yards to our car. And I remember that walk, I didn't say a single word. No one said anything. And as I was walking, I just felt all that emotion, and there was a thought inside of me to go, I cannot wait until we get in our car and close all the doors and it's just us. Because I'm going to let them have it. Because all those things were just boiling inside of me. We get in our car, and I remember the doors closed, and my emotion was high, and I so wanted to react. But in this instance, I reminded myself to respond. For the next 4 or 5 minutes, we just drove in silence. And I drove and I just kept thinking, respond, take your time, capture your thoughts. You're so emotional right now, capture them and surrender them to Christ. I begin to think about all the times I've messed up, all the times I've told God, I promise I won't do it again, and I do it again. In His grace, in His patience, in His mercy. And it empowered me to look over my shoulder about 5 minutes later and say, "Sam, I want to let you know you're my son. And I love you. And there's nothing you will ever do in your life to stop me from loving you." And then we talked about His consequence. And in that moment, I responded. But I have messed this up so many times in the past. And I've reacted, which has led to such incredible regret with my sons. But that's the power of responding. So, bottom line, when it comes to our words, they're powerful. Remember that. Don't lose sight of the fact of how powerful your words are, and a little spark can create a raging inferno on the mountains. Don't lose sight of that. Remember. Secondly, surrender. When something happens and you walk into that situation, maybe in your marriage, maybe with your kids, maybe with your boyfriends or girlfriends, or with your parents and you see them do whatever it may be. When you walk into that situation, you kind of feel your thoughts boiling up because your thoughts turn into words. To surrender. To pause long enough. To respond. Capture your thoughts. And surrender them to Christ, and be willing to ask and answer the question, what does love require of me to say? And if we can establish those guardrails in our life, it can lead to an incredible outcome, which again, Paul gives us the outcome. Do not let any unwholesome talk come out of your mouths, but only what is helpful, profitable, for building others up according to their needs, that it may benefit those who are listening. Imagine if I talked that way. Imagine what that would do and how that would breathe life into your marriage, how that would breathe life into your parenting, how that would breathe life into your relationships. Your words are powerful. Remember that, and surrender and be willing to ask and answer the question, what does love require of me to say? Let me pray for us. Father, thank you for this day, for your grace, for your love, and for your patience for us. I'm so grateful. Father, I'm also just really grateful for the fact that you have preserved the letter of James all these years to give us insight even in today, in our lives, in our culture, in our relationships. It speaks to us. And so, Father, as I think about remembering and surrendering, and these are difficult things, and emotions can get high, and I just pray for every single one of us that you meet us, that you remind us to pause and remember the power of our words, and ultimately to surrender, to do what you've done for us. trust you with this. In Jesus' name, amen.